I thought we'd start our brief tour with a bird's eye view of the chamber. I'm speaking to you right now from one of the visitors' galleries. Now, there are galleries for visitors along both sides and at both ends of the chamber. Immediately above the speaker's chair, for example, there is a public gallery. Immediately below that gallery is the press gallery, and that's normally full of journalists during question period each day. I'm standing at the opposite end of the chamber from the speaker's chair right now, and this is what's known as the ladies' gallery, which sounds a little archaic. And right below this gallery is the diplomat gallery. As well, on both sides of the chamber, you have galleries for guests of members of Parliament, the Speaker, and the Prime Minister. Now, this is an historic chamber, but it's not really all that old, considering this is the second one that's been on this site. I think most of you are aware that there was a disastrous fire in 1916 that destroyed the original Parliament buildings. This building was only completed in 1920. There are a number of interesting things I'd like to point out about the chamber. Now, this is built of limestone from Tyndall, Manitoba, and white oak. And there's an awful lot of carving of both of these materials. This is still very much a work in progress as far as the limestone is concerned. If you come and visit the Parliament buildings, you'll notice a number of blocks of limestone that are yet to be carved, and many of the carvings that you might assume have been here for many years are quite recent. There is a major group which represents elements of the Constitution which were only completed in the last 10 or 20 years, as were the stained glass windows, which are a prominent part of this chamber. Each of those windows represents a different province or territory. I might just point out the Ontario window, which has trilliums and maple leaves in there representing Ontario. The ceiling is another work of art. It's entirely covered by Irish linen, and that was painted after the linen was installed. So we can imagine what a job it was painting a ceiling as large as this one. I'm sure the painters had to lie on their backs for hours painting the designs on the ceiling. So that's really quite remarkable. Now, moving down from the ceiling to the floor, another very prominent feature is the speaker's chair, and that's interesting in itself. It was a gift from the Empire Parliamentary Association back in 1921. So when this house first started after the fire, there was a different speaker's chair here. This was a gift that came a little later, and it includes some very interesting wood. There's wood in the chair that came from Nelson's flagship Victory, and there's also wood that dates back to the 14th century from Westminster Hall in England. So it's quite remarkable just for the historic value. It's also a very beautiful piece of work. Directly in front of the speaker's chair is the clerk's table. Now, the table is important not only because of the clerks who sit there and provide procedural advice to the speaker, but also because it's the resting place of the mace. Now, the Sergeant-at-Arms carries the mace into the house each day before business starts and lays it on the table, and the business of the house cannot take place without the mace. So it's a very important element of this chamber. I should mention that the current mace is a gift from the Lord Mayor of London after the original mace was destroyed again in the fire of 1916. They've discovered a small piece of the original mace after the fire, and that was incorporated into the mace we now have. Now let's go downstairs to where the action takes place. Well, I've just entered the House of Commons through the government lobby. Now, the lobby is a room that runs the whole length of the House of Commons on each side of the chamber. So we have a government lobby on this side, and there's an opposition lobby behind the opposition benches. Now, this is where I spend a good deal of my time each week while the House is in session. I spend many hours sitting here, and this is my desk. Now, this also explains where the term backbencher came from. As you see, we have 5 rows of seats, and I'm in the second last row. And that's determined largely by how long one has been a member of Parliament. So we have people who've been here since even the early 60s, and they gradually move up to the front benches unless they're appointed to cabinet, where they're automatically in the first 2 rows. But other than that, it's based on when you were elected, and then it's in alphabetical order. So this is my seat. Now, I've moved around a number of times since I've been in the House of Commons, and I'll likely move again. Now, when The House is in session. These seats are not always full of members of Parliament sitting in their places. Most of you are probably most familiar with question period. You see clips on the nightly news, or you may tune into an important speech like the budget speech when the Minister of Finance does that each February. And you'll see all of these seats filled with members of Parliament. Sometimes it's quite noisy in here, but most of the time this is quite quiet, and there are not that many MPs sitting in their seats. And it's not that MPs are not doing their jobs when they're not sitting in the House of Commons. The fact is, we're all normally off doing something else, primarily committee work. We're all members of standing committees of the House of Commons, and we have a responsibility to be in those committees. We also have something called quorum, which is the government's responsibility, and it means we have to have a minimum of 20 members in the House of Commons just to conduct the business of Parliament here. So you'll find that if you visit the House or watch on television anytime other than question period, you'll likely find that there are not all that many MPs in their seats. I just wanted to point out to you where the Prime Minister sits. Well, this is where the Prime Minister sits, surrounded by his cabinet, and directly opposite the Prime Minister, traditionally 2 sword lengths apart, is the Leader of the Opposition. Now, even though this is a very old building, I wanted to point out that modern technology has invaded the House of Commons. There are TV cameras in the House, and also a very recent addition is the new computers at the clerk's table. Now, at the clerk's table, and this is where the mace rests when the House is in session, but at this other end of the table, we have the clerk of the House of Commons and assistant clerks. Built-in computers at the clerk's table are another very recent technology addition in the House of Commons. I should also point out that the Speaker has a computer screen hidden just behind that wooden panel in front of his seat, so he can keep track of what's going on the screens at the clerk's table. Now, one of the very simple things they do is, for example, time member speeches, and that's something that is controlled quite rigorously. The Speaker also has a television monitor beside that computer screen which shows him what people at home are seeing on their TV screens. Well, I think we'll wrap up our brief tour of the House of Commons now, and in future shows we'll look at different parts of the Parliament buildings. Welcome back.